I sometimes imagine what it would be like to travel back in time. To travel back in time to High Holy Days here at Temple Bat Yam 2 years ago. I imagine standing here on the bima, sharing some recommendations for how we might deal with what will unfold over the next 2 years. Now, obviously, I couldn't give too much away. That would alter the space-time continuum, and as fans of the Marvel Universe know well, it could upset the folks at the Time Variance Authority. But here's what I imagine saying to our High Holy Day gathering 2 years ago. Something like this. Shana Tova. Welcome to the year 5780. Take a look around. Say hi to your friends. Enjoy these services. It isn't going to be quite the same for a long time. And folks, here are a few tips. First, you might like to stock up on toilet paper. Flour and yeast would be a good idea too. And also PPE. Wait, you don't know what PPE is? Just Google it. Soon enough, you'll know. While you're at it, you may want to upgrade your internet to a higher speed, get that new computer you've been waiting for. And you know what? Splurge on the high-resolution webcam. You won't regret it. And that family trip you were planning in spring 2020? Yeah. You might want to scale back those expectations. Maybe buy a tent for the backyard. Oh, and planning a wedding in the next couple of years, or a big birthday or anniversary or a bar or bat mitzvah? Well, think creativity, flexibility, and expect a big dose of disappointment. As for investment tips, you really can't go wrong with anything that doomsday preppers might be into. Except oil. For a while, they're actually paying you to take it from them. And also, it might be a good idea to dredge up those old high school textbooks. Review some topics you maybe haven't thought about for a while, like basic biology and how the scientific method works. You know, how to know if something helps or doesn't in reality. And while you're at it, you may also want to brush up on the American electoral system and civics and American history in general. And when it comes to thinking about human psychology, a great story to think about is the one about the guy whose boat sinks in the middle of the ocean, and he prays to God to save him, and a ship arrives, and he waves the ship away, and then a helicopter arrives, he waves the helicopter away, and when he finally drowns and faces the Holy One in the world to come, God gets angry with him and says, "You schmendrick, I sent a ship, I sent a helicopter." You might also want to take time to read up on the fall of Saigon and on why Afghanistan has been known through history as the graveyard of empires. You may want to rewatch that old documentary from about 15 years ago by that former next president of the United States called An Inconvenient Truth. Oh, might want to dust off The Handmaid's Tale also. Of course, time travel is just a rabbi's fantasy. It's not even possible for someone who owns a DeLorean. But as we find ourselves on the cusp of this new year, 5782, we would do well to learn from the lessons the last couple of years. And if there's one thing we've all learned about these past couple of years, it's that we should give up on trying to predict the future. We know that the last 2 years aren't the first time in human history when people have been taken by surprise. After all, the folks in Pompeii never saw it coming. And in more recent history, there was Pearl Harbor, the assassination of JFK, the Yom Kippur War, and 20 years ago, later this week, what we now simply refer to as 9/11. All of these events, and so much of what has happened over these last couple of years, came out of left field. They shocked us to the core. And in our own lives, we know too well that events can hit us from out of nowhere. A terminal diagnosis, a procedure that goes terribly and unexpectedly wrong, a car crash, a sudden episode of mental illness, the death of a loved one, the unexpected loss of a job. Even Abraham, in the biblical story we just read, had no idea how even one day would unfold. He begins the day with a combination of dread and zeal in the belief that he will take his favorite son Isaac up the mountain and sacrifice him to an invisible deity, believing with all his being that this barbaric act is what God wanted. We, the readers, know how the day will end, yet for Abraham, it's like a bolt out of the blue. He hears his name called out, Avraham, Avraham, al tishlach yadcha el hana'ar. Abraham, Abraham, do not stretch out your hand against the boy. Can you imagine his tears of relief? The joy-filled weeping that must have accompanied Abraham's realization that his precious Isaac would be spared such an unspeakable fate. We are no better at knowing what the future holds than Abraham was the day he set forth to sacrifice his son, Isaac. And yet we so badly want to know what the future holds. That's why tarot card reading and horoscopes are so popular, and why financial gurus pore over economic models and watch all kinds of indicators. But as John F. Kennedy once said, we know nothing for sure except the fact that we know nothing for sure. And as the historian and writer James Truslow Adams once observed, while an astronomer can predict precisely where every star will be at 11:30 tonight, they can make no such prediction about their own teenager. And as the old Yiddish proverb proclaims, a Mensch tracht und Gott lacht. People plan, but God laughs. As another new year begins, knowing what surprises we have faced over the last couple of years, we are aware of the utter futility of trying to predict the future. As much as one may like to, no rabbi or anyone else for that matter is going to visit us from the future to tell us what will happen in this new year, 5782. And to make matters worse, at this season in particular, the Unatane Tokef prayer haunts us. It taunts us by asking us to reflect on who will live and who will die, who by water and who by fire, who by illness and who by plague. So what are we to do? We who cannot know what will unfold in the hours, days, weeks, months, and years ahead. Well, the first thing we need to do is kind of obvious, but it's often neglected, and so bears constant reminder. When we spend too much of our energy worrying about what will happen, we miss the opportunity to be present to that which is here and now. When Abraham hears God's instructions, his response is simply the word hineni. Here I am. I am present. I am here in this moment. As we enter this new year, could we do a better job of practicing the presence required to truly say, hineni, I am here, now. I am here now with my child, with my parent, my spouse, my client, my colleague, my student. Here now with myself. Since we cannot know what lies around the next corner, let us seize the day, seize this moment, breathe, be mindfully present in the now. Let us strive as best we can to cherish every moment by practicing hineni and saying, here I am. The second thing we can do is nurture something that so many of us struggle with: faith. Not necessarily faith in some invisible deity that will make everything okay for us, but rather the kind of faith that says that having hope in the future is worth the risk. The kind of faith that casts aside cynicism and fatalism. The kind of faith that says that our experiences, our choices, our relationships, our failures, our accomplishments have an ultimate purpose. The kind of faith that Abraham demonstrated when he walked up the mountain with some wood, kindling, a knife, and his beloved son. Not that he was willing to sacrifice Isaac, but that somehow he knew in his kishkas that it would turn out okay. The kind of faith that says that whatever happens, somehow we will be okay. The kind of faith that says, even if we are not okay, that's okay too. Finally, one of the gifts Judaism bequeathed the world is a revolutionary concept of time. Ancient cultures saw history as operating on a continual repeating loop. Just as the seasons progressed in predictable fashion year after year, just as the sun's trajectory could be mapped through the skies, so too did history move through immutable cycles. Things were just the way they were, and they would always be that way. But Judaism presented a different view of time, one that was radical for its age. Yes, there are cycles, familiar patterns year over year as one season gives way to another. But time is not an inevitable loop. It's more like a spiral staircase climbing ever heavenward. Sometimes we slide a few steps backwards. The march of history takes a tumble. But the staircase goes ever upwards. And it has a directionality to it. It has a trajectory toward harmony, toward healing. As Martin Luther King reminded us, history has an arc that bends towards justice. But as we know too well, this trajectory is by no means inevitable. The staircase of history may have the potential to climb ever higher, yet its trajectory is still an option for us to choose, individually and collectively. Each one of us can be part of the effort of humanity in general and the Jewish people in particular to lead history upwards and onwards towards a better future. A future that is more just and more harmonious. A future envisaged by our prophets of old, one that is worthy of the messianic days. Today, as we welcome the new year 5782, we acknowledge that no one is going to come and tell us precisely what this year has in store for us. But the truth is that while we cannot predict the future, there is much we can do. In this new year, we can cherish the moments we have by practicing the power of Hineni, here I am. We can nurture our faith, our quiet hope in the possibility of the future. And we can individually and collectively recommit ourselves to the bold notion that even though we can't predict the future, we must never give up on trying to shape it. In so doing, may we together move our world from where it is to where it ought to be. And we say, Amen.